I will now call to order the Monday, August 3rd, 2011 informational meeting of the Sioux Falls City Council. Welcome to all those in attendance at Carnegie Town Hall and those viewing us on Channel 16 or at siouxfalls.org. We'll begin today's meeting with a report from the Land Use Committee meeting held on Monday, September 26th. Councilor Erpenbach.
Thank you. In place of Council Chair Rolfing, who is not with us this afternoon, just a brief report on the Land Use Committee. We did talk about some zoning amendments to define country clubs, and talked a little bit about some changes to be made to the licensed manufactured home parks ordinance. Both of those, I think, were moved on to the full council. Then we talked about zoning ordinance amendments to allow street legal ATVs and utility trailers to be included in the definition of personal passenger vehicles. We're going to talk about that some more as a committee. And as you read in the Argus Leader this morning, we are talking about urban agriculture, what to do with pigs and goats and chickens and corn, I guess. But stay tuned for further action on that. That will not come before the full council for a while yet. So thank you.
Any questions for Councilor Erpenbach? If not, we'll go on to City Council open discussion, and we'll ask Councilor Brown to preview today's Fiscal Committee meeting.
Fiscal Committee will meet immediately following this informational. We have one agenda item, no action, information only. It will be on the Sioux Empire County Fair in regards to the proposal by the county commissioners for the city sales tax. So please join that conversation. We'll have a number of presenters, and that will start right around 5 o'clock. I do have another issue, if I may. We've gotten off track with not having Lewis and Clark present to us. We used to get quarterly updates from them. I've had a number of people ask me recently, with the lack of federal support, what that means to Sioux Falls in terms of true-up. So I did see Mark. Mark, I don't know if Troy Leonard, or not Troy Leonard, Troy Larson is the correct person to come before us, or if we also need city representatives to talk about whether we would need a true-up at some point if federal dollars don't continue to flow as we had hoped.
Certainly. We did set them up on quarterly updates, and then when we've recently talked to Troy, there wasn't much to update, and so I think that's been the reason that we got off that course. But at any time, he's willing to come and provide an update. Chad Heavey's our delegate, and so between Chad and Troy, they could certainly provide. But they're still on track to deliver water by April of 2012, and we'll begin to take our contractual minimum and, again, work with Congress to get that project funded. So we can certainly, as early as November, try to get Troy here if that would work.
Yeah, and I specifically would like to know in terms of what we are online for in terms of any true-up if those federal dollars don't come through. So whomever can best address that, I would appreciate hearing from that person.
Okay, very good.
Any from the council? Is there any perspective on when we want to hear that?
As soon as possible, from my standpoint.
November? Okay.
We'll work to get on your calendar for November, and a series of those true-ups won't be known until those future bids are in, but I think we can at least talk contractually how the contract is set up and when potentially we'd know that. Okay?
Very good. Thank you.
All right.
Other City Council open discussion. Councilor Jameson.
Thank you. Just a quick update. We did have an audit committee meeting last Tuesday. Rich Oaksel is here. If you could give us just a brief update, but we had several items we covered. We did a transit contract compliance report, a contract agreement monitoring report, a fraud policy that we're working on, and the 2012 audit plan. But Rich, if you could just give us a quick summary.
Yeah, Rich Oaksel, Internal Audit. Good afternoon, City Council. The two audit reports were the first transit contract compliance audit and also a report on contract and agreement monitoring. I have a request in to present that to you on November 7th. At the informational meeting. I have a draft of a fraud policy. I'll be discussing that in a week or so with the city attorney and the director of HR, and hopefully present that have something to discuss with the fiscal committee at their November meeting, so I'll be in touch with Councilor Brown about that. And then you should have gotten an email from me about input for the 2012 audit plan, and I've gotten some feedback so far from council members and also from city directors, so that'll be coming up. So that's all I have.
Any questions for Councilor Jameson or Rich? If not, Councilor Erpenbach.
Thank you. A couple of things. I first wanted to congratulate and thank Councilor Brown for his years of service on the Homeless Advisory Board, which is a city-county project, and Vernon was a strong voice for those who are underserved in our community. And I'm honored that the council appointed me to replace him. There's no replacing Vernon, I'll promise you that, but I am going to try. And I had my first meeting today with the Homeless Advisory Board as a member. And I just wanted to direct you to, the Homeless Advisory Board does have a website, and I apologize, I don't have the address, Vernon might, but I just wanted to bring to light, we get a dashboard every month as the Homeless Advisory Board, and it talks about the number of nights that people spend in homeless shelters, the amount of food that the food pantry is handing out, even the Faith Temple Church food giveaway every Friday is on this dashboard. And I just wanted to give you an update that everything, all of the numbers are up. All of the shelter bed nights, all of the food giveaways, all of the Children's Inn people, all of those things are up in Sioux Falls. And so I just wanted to bring that to your heart and to your mind that, and if you want to learn more, get on the Homeless Advisory Board website online. But this is something that we need to keep in the forefront of our thoughts, and as we pass legislation for the City of Sioux Falls, this is important information. So I will keep you updated. Thank you.
Councilor Karski.
I just wanted to inform the council, I attended 2 events last week. One was the Retired Senior Volunteer Program, their annual banquet, and their recognition of their volunteers. And outstanding program. South Dakota, I learned, is 3rd in the nation for volunteer hours from our people in this great state. And RSVP, their program, what they do for our community, the thousands of hours that are donated there, we owe them a debt of gratitude. That's a great thing. And then on Friday night, Councilor Jameson and myself were at the Civil Air Patrol annual awards banquet, where we had another Jameson, Colonel Matt Jameson, as our guest speaker, who did a fantastic job talking about leadership, and a great group of people there too. It focused a lot on the hours that they spent on the flooding and just what they do for our community, our state, and a great group of people, again, all volunteers. Our community is so indebted to all the volunteers that we have in so many different ways, and just want to thank them.
Thank you. Councilor Anderson, Jr.
Yes, I want to thank Councilwoman Erfenbach for going on a tour last Friday of the Joe Foss Old Franklin School. The school has been put up for sale by the school district, and it was just an ideal to start a conversation on what could be a good use of that facility. After walking through it, we had some of our city staff there to also give us some recommendations. We found the building to be, a nice, solid building. So the next step on this conversation is going to be going to the Whittier Neighborhood Association and asking the neighborhood of what their ideals of how this building could continue to contribute to the neighborhood in the city. So on that, hopefully sometime here by the end of October, we will hold a public meeting and continue the discussions. Information that we received at the meeting or the walkthrough has been passed to the rest of the city council also.
Thank you. Any questions for Councilor Anderson, Jr.? Councilor Jameson, you have another item?
If I could, just given the time to think here, on the transit contract compliance report, one of the things that the committee kind of learned is that we haven't done a study of the rates that we charge for transit services for many years. I think we still charge $1 a ride still today, $2 maybe. Anyway, one of the considerations is for us to look at those numbers and analyze whether we should increase those fees or not. And then just given some of the news that came out today regarding the potential loss of funding to our transit system, I think it sparked on what Vernon was talking about and our partners in all this, the federal government. And in fact, there's other things I know we have going on in the city, like our levy project, where we hope to be reimbursed for some of the money that we borrowed in order to get that project done. So I'm not sure, Vernon, if that's what you're leading to, is all the other federal projects, but I think the levy project would be one to consider, as well as the potential of not getting reimbursed. What impact would that have on us? And are we behind, and or where are we at on that status, I guess? Thank God we are not dealing with any flooding here, but I'm not sure, Vernon, if that's some of what you were hinting at, but it just dawned on me later thinking about our audit report. So I just thought I'd share that transit analysis of those rates is a big deal for the council to consider raising those rates. I don't know that it will happen. It was just the audit committee's recommendation that we review those numbers, so it's just a little bit of a heads up. That's all.
Councilor Anderson, Jr.?
If I remember correctly, too, Councilman Jamison, a couple of years ago, Transit and the city planner, Deborah Gaikowski, who is in charge of the transit, brought a proposal to raise those rates, and there was a great pushback against that. And I think, but I do agree with you, this is something that we do need to continue to monitor and look at, and especially as we watch what happens in Washington, D.C. with the transit bill.
Any further council open discussion? If not, I have one housekeeping item. Last year, and I guess in previous years, the council has canceled the Monday informational following Thanksgiving. That would be the 28th of November, and then the Monday following Christmas, which would be December 26th. Is that the wishes of the council to follow that tradition? I'm seeing a lot of head nodding, so I will inform the clerk's office that those two informational meetings will be canceled. Anything further? If not, we'll go on to our presentations. We'll begin this afternoon with the ADA Transition Plan Update. City Attorney Fifley.
Thank you, Madam Chair and City Councilors. Dave Fifley with the Office of the City Attorney. Today I have the pleasure of introducing to you folks, as well as the City of Sioux Falls, Dr. Peter Blank and Mr. Jim Falekos. Briefly, Dr. Blank holds a law degree from Stanford, a PhD from Harvard, and has written essentially the Hornbook on disability law, and he is an internationally renowned expert on disability and accessibility issues. Mr. Jim Falekos graduated from Columbia Law School, and he is also an expert in disability and accessibility issues, and he recently worked for the Americans with Civil Liberties Union in New York City, and then specifically dealt with some transit issues for New York City. The Americans with Disabilities Act was passed about 20 years ago, and it requires the city to maintain what's called a transition plan, which in essence evaluates all the city programs, services, and buildings to make sure they're accessible for our citizens with physical challenges. We have retained the services of these two experts, and I want to introduce them and have them explain to you the process. And we appreciate the City Council's support in this endeavor, and we hope that you, as well as the city as a whole, will be more educated on this process. The most important part of this process is public input in terms of what issues are out there, what types of things people are experiencing with accessibility issues, and we welcome them to give us their feedback. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Blank.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, Madam Chair, and council members. On behalf of Mr. Falekos and myself, it really is a great honor to be here. I have been to Sioux Falls many times. For many years, I actually was a Hawkeye. I lived in Iowa City and have done work periodically with the city over the years when Falls Park was being renovated with regard to the stadium, and have gotten to know the city quite well, and can report to you, I think, today some very positive things. Number one, we've held a series of town fora in which we really have done what Mr. Fifley has said, and that is to get to know the stakeholders in this process. We've met with the mayor, and the mayor made it very clear to us, in his words, pull down the covers, and let's not talk about minimal compliance, which of course we want to focus on, but let's focus on what is realistically possible, what's capable of success, and most importantly, what makes Sioux Falls a great city for people to live in. And that means for people with disabilities, for people who are pushing around baby strollers, for people who are elderly, and for any other people who have different challenges and issues they face with regard to city programs and services. So Jim and I have been going around, this is our second trip here on this matter, and have held these meetings with various stakeholders. For example, today we were at Independent Living Choices and Dakota Abilities. Last time we held a number of meetings in the town, in the libraries, and yesterday we were in Falls Park and New Family Park, which is going to be a great addition to the city, you know, the fishing area. And our task is essentially to break up these programs and services into areas like transit. We've heard some information on transit earlier, on parks, on technology, on sidewalks, on snow removal. The concept being, how do you develop an integrated approach to the city's programs and services so that they are fairly accessible to everybody? That doesn't mean that everything's going to be accessible all the time to everybody, but it does mean that in good faith and in the overall scheme of the programs and services under this ADA transition plan, that there'll be a fair and equal opportunity for any citizen to have equal benefit to the fantastic services and parks and programs that the city provides. So we're very early on in our process. We will be preparing a report, which of course we will share with the city for comment. It will essentially be a binder with some introductory remarks, with chapters on each of the areas which we've talked about, and importantly, we hope on some useful suggestions which the City Council and others may consider that will help not only in compliance with the ADA, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act, of course, but in ways that make strong economic sense for the city with regard to visitors, with regards to elderly, with regards to the economic sort of situation that Sioux Falls is in, and with regard to, of course, a look to the future. So that's our basic presentation. Jim, did you want to add anything to that?
Not necessarily. I'm happy to answer questions.
Among the major topics we heard about, for example, and we continue to hear about, of course, has to do with paratransit and access issues, has to do with sidewalks issues, and of course, as Jim knows from his hometown, what it's like to sometimes have to use his wheelchair and go on the street because the snow is not plowed on the sidewalks. Snow removal, which of course has been an issue here only because I understand increasingly you've had a series of very snowy winters, and we want to pay attention, of course, to accessibility in those times as well. So I'm delighted to take any questions or comments you may have, Madam Chair. Otherwise, we're delighted to report back to you periodically, either in this venue or informally. And of course, we believe that not only will the City of Sioux Falls meet the compliance standards of what we've seen so far, but that we believe that you will be an example and an exemplar, we hope, for other cities as well in these areas.
Any questions, guests? Councilor Karski.
Yes, sir. I'm just curious if there's any one thing that maybe jumped out at you from your traveling around town that maybe shouldn't wait for a formal presentation, anything that you can tell us that you guys really need to look at this now and take care of this now?
Well, the one area that was raised already with regard to transit is one area we've jumped on right away, and that's because there have been some complaints with regard to the transit area. So we want to jump right in terms of, for example, use of paratransit, how it integrates with the fixed bus route system, the extent to which accessibility exists in terms of the drop-offs and the pick-ups, and how that coordinates with sidewalks. The second thing that has jumped out at us, of course, which is not new to Sioux Falls, as I've said already, is the terrific issues that are faced with weather and with snow removal in particular. And we will be back in the winter, and we'll be traversing various places to test that firsthand. Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Next, we'll hear about the railroad rail yard relocation project update by Joshua, I guess, Peterson.
Thank you. Josh Peterson with City Engineering. Thanks for inviting me back again to do our regular quarterly update on the project. It's been another busy 90 days, and I'll kind of give you a little bit of an overview. Got no formal presentation today, just a verbal update. Start off with, I guess, just wanted to revisit last time I presented the feasible alternatives. That was kind of the milestone I reached at my last presentation of determining what were the different options we found were feasible and we're going to take into the environmental process. And those still have not changed. We still have the 2 locations for the new switch yard out along Rice Street that we're continuing to evaluate. And then as far as the connections between the 3 main rail lines, we still have the new bridge across the river in Falls Park, and also the siding track along the rail line running south of town. So both of those are still on the table. We are still working with BNSF Railway on the exact positioning of that siding option. That's kind of the major stepping stone we're working on right now, is to determine exactly where the north limits and the south limits of that new line would be at. And then rolling into the past 90 days, what have we been working on? We've been progressing with starting the draft of the environmental assessment document, the Chapter 1, which is the purpose and need. We've been working with our consultant and with DOT Federal Highway on really defining what the purpose and the need of the project is, and any sideline benefits that we might get out of the project. The Ellison Eastern Rail Yard, which was just kind of some real rough design at the last update. We've tweaked that a little bit, get a little more details to find out the exact footprint of what that would look like, so that we could adequately survey the impacts to the property and to the environment. Continuing with our coordination on some of the regulatory agencies that are part of the review process. I had a tour with a representative from the Flanders Santee Sioux tribe, where we went out and looked at the locations to get the input from a tribal perspective to make sure that they had no issues with what we were looking at. Another design issue we've worked on as a potential sideline alternative that we've been looking at is a new spur line to service John Morrell, and it was not a primary portion of the project, but it was a sideline to help us remove the existing spur line that runs through Falls Park to service John Morrell. We did a little bit more engineering on that and worked with the feasibility with Burlington Northern to see what we could do there, and we found out the proposed alignment there was too many issues with grade. There's a fairly steep grade coming from the existing line that runs northeast to get a transition down to John Morrell. So that has been removed, and for those of you that might not be picturing in your mind where that is, that would have been running along the south side of the old stockyards, and there's a steep grade change from where the existing rail line is there behind that to come down into John Morrell. So that we've determined is not feasible, so we're not going to pursue that going forward. Kind of the big thing we've been doing over the last couple months is the environmental field survey work. We sent out over 100 letters to property owners here in early September, or yes, late August actually, to property owners to let them know that we were evaluating some alternatives next to their property, and that we were going to have some staff out in the field actually looking at various things on their property, taking some measurements for noise and vibration, looking at potential wetlands, if there's any historic or cultural resources on those properties that we might be impacting. The survey work was done, took about 2 weeks in September. We did get that completed. Still crunching the data on that, but from the preliminary results we've seen, we haven't found any major impacts to concern us with the Ellison Eastern yard location or the south siding location. Another thing we've been doing over the last 90 days is some public outreach. I've had multiple meetings and presentations to the public. Met with the park board in August to give them an update on the project and review the current alternatives we're looking at. In September, I participated in a listening and learn session at Falls Overlook Cafe to give an update to some citizens that were interested about the project. Met with the Brandon City Administration in September as well. The Ellison Eastern rail yard is fairly close to Brandon, between Sioux Falls and Brandon. It actually overlaps the kind of imaginary boundary line between the growth areas of Sioux Falls and Brandon. So we want to get them up to speed with what we're looking at and get their input as well going forward. So I met with the administration this month, and actually going to have a meeting with their city council here in October as well to present it to the council members. The other thing we've been doing, it's been long overdue, but I finally got it updated, is the project website on the city's webpage. With the new alternatives we've been looking at and some of the new information, we wanted to make sure we could get new maps out there and all that information for the public to take a look at and provide comments. And we made it an easy link for people to get to, siouxfalls.org/railroad. People can log on, take a look at all the presentations I've given to the council and some of the presentations out to the public. And also we have a comment form built right into the web page so people can submit comments and get them directly into the record for the project. So I think it's going to be a valuable tool for people to keep up to date with what's happening with the project and be able to provide input. Some of the upcoming milestones, just wanted to give a heads up on over the next 90 days. I'll be providing a little more public outreach tomorrow with meeting with the Downtown Development Group to give them a little update on the project. As I said before, going to be meeting with the Brandon City Council in October to give them a presentation. Our next Project Steering Committee meeting is also in October. And we're kind of winding up what I call the information gathering stage of the project and really moving into the public outreach and public information phase of that. Two of the big key things coming up here, what we're targeting in late November. One would be another update to the City Council where I could bring in the consultant team so they could give a more detailed presentation to you and give you a better explanation of the nuts and bolts of the project than I ever could. So I'll be working with the clerk staff to try and set that up with you, and to be efficient with our efforts on that. We'll also be coordinating our next public meeting on the project at the same time. So What we're targeting is late November. I don't have a date for you right now because I want to make sure that I'm coming to you with all the information and we're not waiting on something. So I'll get that set up once we get a little closer, and I make sure I've got all the adequate information to provide to you. With that, I will open it up to questions.
Questions for Josh? Counselor Entman.
Josh, did I hear you correctly that the environmental impact study is now done?
No. The field survey work that we've done, we've collected all the data. We've gone out and surveyed all the potential sites, working on the field or the desktop surveys where we can research records and find out other historical information on the project. But the environmental document is not done. We've started drafting Chapter 1, working into Chapter 2, which is the feasible alternatives, and Chapter 3, which is the environmental impacts.
So when do you expect that portion of the study to be all done? The environmental will be completely?
Well, complete is next year. What we would potentially have is by the end of the year or early next year to have a draft of the document done to put it out to the public for their review and comment. But the schedule is for the actual completion and to have determined which is the feasible or which is the preferred alternatives would be fall of next year.
May I one more? Upon completion of that and presentation of that document then, it's my assumption, correct me if I'm wrong, that design will then start, is that correct?
Correct. When the document is completed, if Federal Highway determines that there's a finding of no significant impact, then we could roll into the design phase.
And how long does the design phase take again?
It will depend on the alternatives that are selected. A bridge takes longer to design than a straight rail line, so we'll see what alternatives are before that, before we can pin down a design schedule.
Just one more comment, and if I might, Madam Chair. I would suggest that if you do come to us in November with the A-team again to give us an updated deal on it, I'd like to see an updated timeline also.
Okay.
Okay? Thank you.
Other questions? Counselor Jameson.
Josh, thanks for coming. From my point of view, this is about as painful as watching paint dry. This process is killing me. And I appreciate that you have the patience to execute all these steps because I couldn't. I'd be out there tipping rail lines over or something. So thank you for that. The other is, do you have any reference of the cost involved in laying a mile of rail and or building a bridge to handle rail cars, just to give us any kind of knowledge of what it really is going to cost? And is there enough money to have this project happen? Do you have any references of that?
You know, I don't have it with me. I've got some ballpark per foot costs of track and bridge, but it really does depend on the type of bridge. For instance, going over the Big Sioux River in a floodplain, we could have a long bridge, could be a tall bridge. There are a lot of variables there that it's tough to give you an accurate cost estimate until we pin down some of those variables. And I do understand where your concern is on what is the cost, is it going to be over the earmark, and how much would we need. And I want to provide you that information as soon as I can. My fear is trying to give you the information before I have all the questions answered, that you'll get stuck on a number, and then when I have to come back and tell you, no, it's 20% more, 50% more, then there's some explaining that needs to happen there. So I don't want to give you inaccurate information and have you focus on that. I want to give you correct information so you can plan accordingly. But that's something we hope to have at that November meeting, is some cost for different alternatives. I do want to say that those would be tentative costs because it would be just a very rough preliminary design. Depending on the public comments that come out of that, could change the scope of some of those alternatives. For instance, if we need to do some sort of tree screening for some houses or a noise wall or something like that, some of that might not be known until we get a sense of what the public's comments are as well. So there are always factors that could be increasing or decreasing the cost, but we want to try and get you the information as soon as we get something that's a little more firm than what I have for you today.
Just in your overall perspective, do you feel confident that there is enough? Or are you nervous about this at all? Should we be nervous?
I get nervous, but that's because I deal with this every day. I think there is a good possibility that there would be some funds needed above the earmark. To what that is, I just don't know at this time. There's a possibility we could come in under, but I think there's a good possibility we could come in over that earmark amount.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Councilor Anderson Jr.
During your presentation, you said that the two options were both off Rice Street?
Correct.
Okay, so then that takes the southeast option off the board then?
No, and that's part of the public outreach I've really had to do, because there's a little bit of misinformation out there that what we're looking at on the south side of town is a full switch yard, and that's not the case. The switch yard is, the potential locations for that are along Rice Street. We've got two locations there. One's a little closer to Sioux Falls and one's a little closer to Brandon. What we're looking at on the south side of town is a single rail line parallel to the existing one. It's termed a siding, but what it is just a place for the railroad to temporarily park a long unit train while they move the locomotive from one end to the other. That is still one of the feasible alternatives, and that is an alternative to the bridge in the downtown area. But that is still a potential alternative.
And then I don't know if this question will be for you or maybe for Mark Cotter. Is this project being reviewed by any of our committees, like UDC, Public Services? And if not, why?
But it's not at a point yet where we'd have, there's a series of steps that we're going through. One of the committees that we have is a steering committee, and there is citizens on that steering committee along with all the agencies. And so our goal is to actually complete that work and then bring before you, here's the feasible alternatives, and make a recommendation and have that discussion at that level. Because right now I would expect that it would be, we're just not to that point yet. Okay.
Mark, while you're there then, so you're going to bring this back to the council then, and we have a say in the whole process? I asked this question last time, and I went back to siouxfalls.org, and I still am not clear as far as what the council's role is in this whole process, as to if we don't believe that the way that you're going is the way that we want to go, do we have the ability to stop it, I guess?
Absolutely. You're the city council. And so we're going through a prescribed step. These are federal agency steps that we'll do today. But just like you've appropriated the earmark, you can unappropriate the earmark. You essentially have full control. We would want this to be a team effort. We want this to be a good long-term community decision, and so by all means the city council will be heavily engaged. Once we get to the point where we identify with the buy-in of the federal agencies, here's the feasible alternatives, here's the one that we would recommend, and then we would work to get a resolution from the city council to endorse that before it would go further.
How much does this part of the project cost? The environmental impact is how much of the total earmark?
It's significant, just like what Josh is talking about, because there's a significant amount of steps. It is, right now we are close to 1.3. Okay. With the current work that's underway, we're at about $1.4 million worth of consulting that needs to go through all these prescribed steps.
And have we been reimbursed for those dollars yet?
We have on a number. We have some that are still in question that Josh is working through with the federal agencies. But at this point, just like recently to study that south side track that's south of Sioux Falls, that takes an amendment to the contract. That was Amendment 6, and federal agencies reviewed that. Once they review it, the DOT and the city, we execute that contract. And so once you have an approved amendment, then as the consultant does work on that amendment, we submit for reimbursement and they pay us. So Josh has managed that contract very cleanly.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Councilor Karski.
Yes, I guess my question's mainly for Joshua, if you don't mind. First of all, I just want to, I have to believe the process of building a railroad has changed a lot in 140 years when it was first put in, so I know that this is a very complicated and involved process. And I went to the website, the siouxfalls.org/railroad, and I'm looking at the alternatives where you've got the maps and that type of thing. Are those fairly new and recent maps?
They've been revised. Some of the maps are from the older version that we presented a couple years ago, but I had them revised and put the new alternatives out there. So they're all new maps.
Okay. Well, Ed, I guess what I would request at our next meeting is, I'm looking at those maps, and the new lines are in red. And I'm seeing a lot of red where we had maybe even fewer black before. And I guess I'd like to hear from you or somebody what we're planning on doing, what those maps all mean, especially to the Falls Park area, maybe some of the neighborhoods that are involved, just a visual so people can see what's happening and what we're talking about doing, because we're not moving the railroad out of the downtown, and in fact, we're just moving a switching yard. There's going to be a lot of rail there, and we're looking at other river crossings and so on and so forth. So I think the public needs to be kept as apprised as possible on what we're doing.
That'd be good. I can definitely review those again. Maybe just to clarify, there are new maps on there, but all that information has been presented to the council before. We've cleaned up the maps and made them maybe a little easier to read and updated them with, some of them are a little dated with some of the old aerial photos, so we cleaned them up and got them current.
Other questions? If not, thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
Is there any other business to come before this body? Councilor Brown, time before the start of the fiscal?
We probably still need to start right at 5, I think, so we'll plan to start then.
Okay, the fiscal committee meeting will start at 5 o'clock. This meeting is adjourned.